We were just saying that that this tshuva of the Melamed Hor, Rabbi David Tzvi brings three opinions about playing an organ in a shul. One is that it's forbidden on Shabbos, but some rabbis didn't say anything about the weekday. Some said it's permitted on the weekday, and they used to indeed play it in Prague and other places for Kabbalat Shabbat. And there are those who say it's forbidden on the weekday. He lists many, many names. One of the names that he lists is Rabbi Mordechai Bennett, who is the rabbi of Rabbi Assad. And this opinion is quoted by the Mishnah Berurah. So I want to show that, because it's a hard question playing it on Shabbat. And it's even playing it on Shabbat's a hard question, because music was permitted through a non-Jew on Shabbat, perhaps. And so weekday it should seem like it's definitely permitted. But of course, it's a whole other issue on the weekday, because weekday is, maybe it's a you shouldn't walk in the ways of a non-Jew. So this is a Shulchan Aruch, commentary of the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah was written by the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Shlomo Meir Kagan, who died in 1930. Mishnah Berurah, I think, was written in the late 1800s. It says, Yesh matirim is the law of the Shabbos. It is permitted, there are those who permit to say to a non-Jew to play with sounds like on Shabbos, they would have had a wedding. Now that's a little strange. So maybe the wedding was right before Shabbos and the wedding party went into Shabbos. The question is, could you have a band at a wedding party that's on Shabbos? Or even a better question would be like Sheva Brachos Shabbos. So the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Sephardic rabbi in the early 1500s, he says, yes, you could ask a non-Jew to play an instrument on Shabbos to gladden the bride and groom. Why? So, because the answer is that it's forbidden rabbinically to play an instrument. It was a decree because you might fix the instrument. Asking a non-Jew to do something rabbinic for a mitzvah is permitted. So the Ramah, Moshe Isserles, who lived soon after, and we've seen him before, he was the Ashkenazic rabbi, he says, Afilu lamar le'eni Yehudi l'takin shir shari. He says, even if you want to ask him to do the biblical thing that's forbidden, which is to fix an instrument, that's permitted because of the honor of the bride and groom. And that's amazing. He says, not only can you ask the non-Jew to do a rabbinic violation, but even a biblical violation, because the honor of the bride and groom is so important. But if it's not a wedding, it's not for the bride and groom, you can't. Now, what does that mean? You can't ask him at all, or you can't ask him to fix it? Immediately, he says, nevertheless, Zman Hazeh, in our time, early 1500s, Nagu lahakel, mitam shisbar, the simajach of that, we are lenient. We are lenient, especially, as we said, with regard to clapping and dancing. Now, because right in the same chapter, the Shulchan Aruch says a Jew is not allowed to dance and clap on Shabbat. Why? Because you might make an instrument. We saw that once. And the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, said, no, we're lenient about that because we're not experts at making instruments anymore. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Right. He explains that the reason that you're allowed to ask a non-Jew to play the instrument on Shabbos for bride and groom is because, as I said, it's one rabbinic thing on top of asking a non-Jew to do something rabbinic. That's permitted for a mitzvah. And there are those places that are machmir, that are strict about this, unless you asked him from before Shabbos. You're not allowed to ask the non-Jew on Shabbos, you have to ask him from before. Now, then he had said, the Shulchan Aruch had said you could even ask a non-Jew to do something biblically forbidden, to fix an instrument. And so the Mishnah Berurah explains this is because of the joy for the bride and groom, that's much more than would usually be permitted. So even though this is forbidden biblically, that would be permitted. He says maybe this may be only. Okay. Then he says, but that's not the case. It's forbidden. In other words, if it's not for a bride. The Mishnah Berurah says, Ratzalamis means to say, in any other simcha shalmitz, any other joyous thing, like a bris on Shabbos or simchas Torah, you would not be allowed to tell a non-Jew to play an instrument. Unless they came on their own or you told them from before Shabbos you want them. Sounds like Chavetz Chaim is saying, by the way, if you want to have a band for Simchas Torah, you hire them from before Shabbos, you could. That's very interesting because Reform shuls do that, maybe conservative ones, but there are very few Orthodox shuls that have a band on Simchas Torah, and it would be seen as, basically being Reform, I think. But the Chavetz Chaim seems to be okay with that. Then he says, Ayin b'shas and Chuvas Mahari. That's what we just looked at. That's what he just quoted in the other tshuva, Rabbi Chelek Alsman that who says it is forbidden to play instruments during prayer, even through a non-Jew. And then he says, look in the Chassam Sofer, who says he brings proofs that it's forbidden even on a weekday to play in the shul instruments. And then the Mishnah Berurah is not so sure about this. He says, says certainly on Shabbos you're not allowed to ask a non-Jew to do it. Now I don't know if he means ask him on Shabbos, maybe asking before Shabbos you could, which is what he seemed to say before. Sounds like the Mishnah Berurah is saying weekday would be okay, and he's not. He's already the late 1800s. Then he says maybe even other things would be, maybe even if it's not a bride and groom, it would still be permitted, like some Torah. So he says one of the reasons you're allowed to ask an non-Jew to play is because, and you're allowed to dance, is we're not worried you're going to make an instrument yourself because we're not experts at that anymore, according to Rabbi Moshe Tzurek. And then he says, look in the Magen Avram, who says no, you can't ask a non-Jew to do something biblical like making an instrument, even for a bride and groom. Okay, so we have an argument about on Shabbos for a bride and groom. Sounds like you could ask a non-Jew, at least certainly from before Shabbos, to play. It sounds like whether you can ask him to do something biblically forbidden, like fixing the instrument on Shabbos, that's an argument. He does quote the rabbi that we just looked at, who says it's forbidden on Shabbos, but may be permitted on the weekday. And he quotes Chassam Sofer, who he says brings many proofs that it's forbidden even on. So we'll look at the next thing that we'll look at is this Rabbi Mordechai Bennett. That's the this Mahari, this tshuva right here. Mahari is the student of Rabbi Mordechai Bennett, who was Rabbi Pickelsberg, and in the earlier part of the 1800s. And this tshuva of the Mahari is actually a quote from a response of Rabbi Mordechai Bennett. So we'll look at that also. Finish the tshuva we're just doing, and then we'll at that one, right? So it kind of morphs over time. In other words, early on, it's extremely permitted, right? In other words, early 1500s, Shulchan Aruch. Well, like it sounds like you could even ask a non-Jew to do something biblical for a bride and groom on Shabbos with instruments. You could certainly ask them on Shabbos, or definitely before Shabbos, to play on Shabbos for a bride and groom. Sounds like maybe even for Simchas Torah to play instruments. And a weekday wasn't even a thought. Of course, you could do it on a weekday. And so then later it becomes the question, the 1800s, okay, now we have a different issue. Is this walking in their ways? Is this the way of the non-Jew? Certainly in Oregon, maybe especially that. So now, even though it might be permitted on Shabbos, it certainly seems permitted on the weekday. And there were shuls that did it on the weekday or on Erev Shabbos. But maybe now, right, the Chassam Sofer is saying, no, this is a whole other issue. It's an issue of walking in their ways. Sometimes today we see instruments as just, I think sometimes Orthodox Jews, because of the Reformation, because instruments are such a big part of Reformed service, I think sometimes Orthodox Jews just have this image that instruments are forbidden for Orthodox Jews, as part of prayer. But that's not really true, of course. I mean, instruments were originally a part of praising God. The Levites did that in the temple. It's the fact that the Reform does that now make it forbidden for us? Does that, it traditionally was, quote, Orthodox, to do it. It was Jewish to play instruments. It happens at the sea in last week's Torah portion. It happens in the temple. Is it possible that the use of it by the Reform as an imitation of the German Christians, can that make it forbidden for Orthodox Jews? Maybe it can, right? Some Sofer would say that. Just like I assume, in the 1500s, wanted to put a tower on your synagogue in a Muslim country or whatever. I guess Muslims have a tower, but in a Christian country, or let's say you wanted to put the bima, say you wanted to have a mechitza, you can see women, right? It only becomes much bigger. Some of these things become a bigger issue because of the Reform. All right, so we'll see that as it morphs over time. Okay, have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good day.